This is probably the third or fourth Zoom interview I've done since they've started that feature, but it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, I had to yell at the guys at Sirius to be like, they started doing it, but our Zoom feed goes out over the air. So like there are a couple of spots when you could hear it on the air, and I'm like, guys, you can't. You can't. That's the least professional thing I've
It
ever heard in
is.
my life.
It is, and it also makes me chuckle because they put that in so you couldn't secretly record people. So
Yeah.
it's
So
the
you know what was
reason.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason that it's there is funny. But I was talking to Sam. I will have done the intro, but I was telling him this is a really cool interview for me to do because I mean, honestly, you on Opie and Anthony when I was fighting, I got XM back in 2004. And then when I was fighting, I spent so much time on the road, so much time on the road. And I'm originally from kind of rural central Pennsylvania, moved to North Jersey, and was in and out of New York, up and down in New Jersey. So it was like a new world in the first place. Obviously, traffic on the road a lot. And I feel like I really kind of grew up with you guys on the show. And so it's really cool for you to be here.
I appreciate being here, man. And I mean, I remember you from way long ago because I remember when you started like reaching out about the show and stuff on Twitter. You were one of the early guys that I felt like, had some stuff going on, like when you were fighting, that I was like, oh, he's listening to the show. Like it made me realize like there are a lot of people that are, hearing us, whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 guys in the studio.
Yeah. And it was, for me, like I said, I got an XM. I was on the road. I was in this new world because Central PA is nothing like North Jersey and New York City. And so it just helped kind of acclimatize me to the environment in general. And then to be able to kind of reach out to you. Honestly, this interview, if it's not 10 years in the making, it's at least 5 years in the making.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would reach out to you and Jim Norton, and it's just really cool that it came to fruition. But then the second reason that I'm really excited to have you here is because I speak a lot to kids, and I talk to kids about resilience and perseverance and kind of carrying yourself the right way, and the idea of was it speak quietly and carry a big stick, or speak softly and carry a big stick, showing up and doing the work. And I think and I posted this on Twitter just now, but you, as much as anyone professionally that I can think of, showed up, put your head down, did the work, knew what you were supposed to do, delivered on it, and has like progressed. I don't want to say the way that people should progress, but like the proper way. You just put your head down and did the work. And I think that's awesome.
Well, I really, really appreciate that, man. Yeah. I mean, that was always my philosophy. I think it's the way I was raised. My dad was a very sort of no excuses guy. Like there's the work and there's a result to the work. And if the result isn't what I wanted it to be or what he wanted it to be, like if the test score was not what it was supposed to be, it's like, well, then we need to do more work. It wasn't sort of like the I did my best thing was like, okay, well, we need to get your best to a different place.
Yep.
It's like there are solutions here. Here's the problem. Here's the solution. Just solve it. And I mean, a lot of times that can take a long time. Like when you apply that to real life, like just saying, I'm just going to do the work and let the work speak for itself. That can take a really long time. And that's why it's also important to me to be doing work that I actually like to do, where I'm allowing the work to speak for itself. And even if people don't necessarily pick up on it, that's fine because I'm satisfied with the work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm going to jump. I'm going to take a step forward and then take a couple steps back. But there's a good segue into what I was thinking. I feel like you've owned kind of not Sam, prime time, last professional broadcaster. Like you've owned all that stuff. And it would be like someone wearing Crocs, right? But feeling uncomfortable wearing a pair of Crocs, and then someone wearing Crocs and owning it, right? So everything you've done, I felt like you've taken it by the balls and you've done it. And speaking from my vantage point as a podcaster and writing books and basically having a voice and putting my voice out there and it not being received, but me keeping doing it, right? And I don't know how well received or not you were from the beginning, but speak to that idea of knowing, hey, I'm Sam and I have this message and I'm good at what I do. I'm going to continue to improve at what I do and I'm not going to stop. Like, where does that belief come from? And then where does that persistence and perseverance come from? And how does it get kind of boosted along the way?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated thing, right? And I'm sure you know that, and I'm sure people listening know that. But I think that the confidence doesn't always come. Like the perception on the outside is that the confidence is there, right? Like I'm looking at you and I see your books in the background, I see your pictures in the background, I see you got a professional setup. Here's a guy who knows what he's doing. But you might not feel that way, right? You might not feel like you know what you're doing at all, but that's the perception. So like I don't think you can assume that everybody that you're looking at is like fully confident in what they're doing, but they're kind of doing it because that's what they do. You know, I can't sit here and been like, okay, well, I do this stuff because I know it's gonna work. Like, no, maybe it won't work. Like that is a thing. Maybe it won't work. And probably lots of times it won't work. But I think it has more to do with I've always, since I was a kid, kind of known, and it sounds basic, but it's not applied, I don't think, as much as basic as it is, it's not applied as much as it should be. Like, I'm just always happiest when I'm doing the things that I like to do
Yeah.
and the way that I like to do them. And it's like, you don't always have to be like, it doesn't even have to be in a rebellious way, you know, like, well, no, you told me to do it this way, but I'm not going to do it. It's like, okay, you know, you want me to do it this way, and that's fine. Like, I'm sure I can figure out a way to do it, but I've just always been sort of really comfortable tucked away in a corner doing my own thing. And the translation of that comes when, you know, if I bring wrestling up, like nobody would ever, as much as they've tried, nobody would ever be able to shame me about being a professional wrestling fan. Cause it's like, I don't know. It's just, there's something in my brain that goes like, okay, if you don't understand why I would be a professional wrestling fan, there's something wrong with
With
you.
you. Yeah, like you're
Right?
weird. I'm
Yeah,
not weird, you're weird.
like this is so great. And you don't see that? Like, sorry, that sucks for you.
Yeah.
That sucks.
And so with that, the what's your philosophy, right? Because I just had someone on Facebook today ask me. So probably 80% of this podcast is I read a book and then I create daily episodes, 5 minutes a day, based on what I read. I love reading books. It's kind of like it fuels me, right? It makes me just feel better to read books, talk about books. And I used to be a teacher, so it works. And I had someone say to me, do you pick books that you like, or do you pick books that you think we'll like? And I have my answer and my philosophy, kind of what guides me. But my question to you is, you have what Sam likes, and you're comfortable tucked in your corner, but if you want to make a livelihood of it, you've got to make sure enough people are listening to make it work in terms of money, making an income. So how do you blend those two? What's your philosophy on blending those two things together?
Well, you absolutely have to be conscious of that. You know, I think that to me from the very beginning was very, very important. Like, I don't think I could have justified spending the amount of time I do with my quote unquote hobbies had I not been able to translate them into something that worked for me professionally. And I think that that's okay. Like, if you haven't gotten there yet, it's like you can still spend part of your day with that hobby that you would like to be your primary source of income. But ultimately, like, we have to have a life. Like, you, especially if you have a family or whatever, like you can't just say, okay, I'm going to give up everything and I'm going to do this. It's like, well, yeah, but that might not work. And putting yourself in a position where, well, this has to work or I'm going to be broke. It usually doesn't work that way. Like, people love to romanticize that and go, well, if I put myself in that position, it has to work. And that's not true. If anything, you've added pressure to it and you've now put a timeline on it because you got to eat, right? So like you put this unnecessary timeline on accomplishing this sort of vague goal of just wanting to do the things that make you happy, as opposed to kind of letting it seep in slowly but surely. You know, I loved wrestling, but for instance, on the wrestling podcast that I do, I don't go halfway. Like, I don't try to do a wrestling podcast that non-wrestling fans would be into. I do a wrestling podcast because my mind was like, okay, this is a niche podcast the people who are as obsessed with wrestling as me, because there are a lot of them, would be into, where we just dive deep and talk about wrestling. But I would not have those conversations on like Jim and Sam on Sirius, because I would know that maybe somebody like you listening, or almost all of the listeners would go, I'm not interested in this. This is not, I don't want to listen to this. And then Sirius would go, well, we're not going to pay you to do a show that nobody wants to listen to. So I'm always super conscious of the audience that any product that I'm involved with has and what they might be into. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I get it wrong, but I'm always aware of that. It's never like a selfish pursuit.
So is it correct then, from what you said, to say that you were into the things you were into? And I want to get to your origins in broadcasting, but let's take wrestling, for example. So you were into wrestling, and then you realized, hey, I could turn this into a livelihood. Like, was that the progression, or was it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was like, okay, I was working for Opie and Anthony, and it was one of those things where that was a show, much like the show that Jim and I do now, where the people that are involved with the show, it's encouraged to find elements of your life that you can bring to the air. Like find the entertaining parts about you and let's bring those elements onto the show. And, there would just be these instances where, I don't know, something would happen on Monday Night Raw that was kind of universally funny, that like I could explain to them, not as wrestling fans, but as human beings. And here's why it's funny. And if I did it in a way where I would never acknowledge that, like I would take everything that happened on wrestling as if it were a fact. I'm watching it like it's a pure sporting endeavor. Like, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but this thing happened and it's real and it's as legit as can be. And I was like, okay, I could bring these elements to the show because they're funny elements. And I felt like I could talk about it like this because they'll have fun kind of mocking me, and the audience would have fun hating me because O&A didn't like what I was doing. So then the audience didn't like what I was doing. So even when the audience was saying like, I hate Sam, there's something enjoyable about that to them. And I don't care about being hated as long as people are enjoying themselves. That's fine.
I'm laughing because as you're talking, I'm and this, I don't know how many years ago, 10, I don't even know, 10 more years ago. But you, and I want to clarify this too. So right now you're like a mainstay with WWE, with wrestling. I see you on A&E. It's like you're everywhere with wrestling. It wasn't always that way.
No.
What I remember, and then you can clarify what I get wrong here, is yes, I'm a diehard listener of O&A. I hear you talk about wrestling. I hear Anthony making fun of you, telling you to stop playing with your dolls. You saying they're not dolls. Like that, to me, to my perception, I don't know if it's accurate, that's like you doing what you just said at Sirius They Say, what entertaining points you bringing in. And then was it that then eventually led to you kind of realizing, man, I either can and or want to have a wrestling side of my life and business as well?
Well, yeah, so I figured out a way, because in the very beginning of my professional life, it was just Opie and Anthony. Like everything was like, okay, what can I do to make the show bigger and make my presence on the show bigger and become a bigger part? And that was what the growth was. And I mean, honestly, that was when like YouTube was in its infancy, podcasts were nothing. So it wasn't like this idea of branching out and doing 100 things, which was the easiest thing in the world. But so I did the wrestling stuff, and then they would have wrestling guests on that kind of, went past wrestling, and the Triple H's, the Mick Foley's, the people that are, kind of pop culture icons at this point. And they would have me on to do various embarrassing things. And one of the publicists at WWE at the time, who's now, one of my best friends, was like, yeah, we're going to bring somebody in to go to the press, because there's a press conference in Times Square. So we're going to bring somebody on the show. I'm like, okay, great. And then he was like, are you going to the press conference? And I was like, what? He was like, are you going to the press conference? And I was like, I mean, what do you mean? It's not open to fans. And he was like,
You're media.
You're a media. You're not a fan. You work for the show. You're on the air. You're a producer. And I was like, I can go to the press conference. He's like, yeah, you can go to the press conference. You can interview people there. And I was like, what? And so I went to the press. Like that day, I got like Zoom recorder or whatever, and I went to the press conference. And the first press conference I went to, I was kind of trying to still, like I said, collect audio for Opie and Anthony and that was really difficult because like you're kind of trying to think of smart ass questions, but like I have such reverence and respect for all these people. Like these are my heroes. So I'm like I'm not going to just go and make fun of them because it wouldn't even, yeah. And it wouldn't even be legitimate making fun of. I'd be like, I'm on the side of the people who don't like me so I'm not going to do that. So, that was a little bit, it was difficult, but I'd like go and I'd ask him, what's the haps? Cause that's what I was doing at the time. And,
what's the apps?
what's the haps? And then, but every now and then, I'd get some sound bites for O&A, but then I'd start asking wrestling questions because I wanted to, because I'm just like, I had this opportunity to. And then I started like putting some videos on my YouTube channel. And like, I would go to different press conferences. And after they opened Pandora's box for the first one, it was like, oh, there's going to be a wrestler at New York Toy Fair. Oh, there's going to be a wrestler here. Like I'm going to everything and doing interviews and, trying to find an intern to come with me and hold the video camera or whatever. And so I was doing all that. And I started putting the wrestling questions that I would ask on my YouTube channel. And they started to build this like big audience because there wasn't any of that. It was me and Peter Rosenberg from Hot 97 that were doing wrestling interviews on YouTube, almost nobody else. And so it would build this huge audience. And I was like, oh, these guys don't know that I'm on a radio show. They don't know me from anything else that I'm doing. They just know me from this. And that's what started to like, when I started to go like, oh, I can have this audience over here and that audience over there. And then I can build an audience with this. And then slowly but surely it was like, I could do a whole show about wrestling and I could do, and it just built and built from there.
Boy, what a fan base that is to have. I'm trying to build a fan base with book reading, and there's not really a lot of rabid book readers out there. You in wrestling, man, it's like, boy, you struck a nerve.
Yeah, especially because like wrestling fans also like love scouring the internet for wrestling content. I mean, that's what I do. I'm sitting there like, it could be the weakest point of wrestling drama on Twitter, and I'm like looking through all the tweets, like, oh, let me see what else is going on. Let me see what else is going on. It's just like, it's a never-ending stream of content.
And then let me ask you this question. This is a personal question from from this exposes me here asking this. What when you started doing your own thing, and I feel like from the beginning there was at least a decent reaction because you have a strong a sticky listenership, and they're rabid fans, and they're into what you're putting out. Have you ever done where you put stuff out, right, and you're self-conscious? Because I do this, right? I do live streams and I do this video, that video, get very little reaction, very little views, very little whatever, and I'm self-conscious of it. And it slips me up during the presentation because in my mind I'm thinking, oh, there's not a lot of people here. And so my delivery is not pure. Did you hit that at all early on? And if you did, how did you get past it, or what did you do with it?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely hit it early on. And it also creeps up on you even after you think you're done with it. Like that doesn't really go away. Like even you get more views than you thought you would get before, but you also feel like you're in a different position. So you start looking at the people above you and you're like, oh, but like these views would have impressed me back then, but they're nothing compared to that dude. So you start still thinking like, well, this isn't getting 100,000 views. Well, this isn't getting 1 million views. Well, this isn't like, and they're going to know this is a waste of time. And yeah, I've been there where that voice starts to creep into your head. And I mean, all you can do is assume if you're talking to a person, if you're not doing it solo, because I have done and still do both. Like if you're talking to a person, you just have to assume that person wants to be there. Right, because they can say no. There's 100 ways to say no. So I kind of try to completely get that out of my head and not think about, the way this is going to be perceived, or as you're like asking a question, this is a stupid question and this is why you're not getting hits. Like like that has to be wiped away. You have to get to this point where if you're gonna do it, you just have to do it. And all the other stuff can't matter. Like if you need to take a break from reading YouTube comments, if you need to take a break from Twitter mentions, if you need to delete the app from your phone for a while, all that's totally fine, I think. Um, because you can't like that same reason that you started doing it because you'll also miss your own growth if you're concentrating on what's not happening. Like you'll miss the little victories that you're getting. Like, you know what? Is this exactly where I want it to be? No, but it really is better than it used to be. And
Yeah.
you'll miss that second part if you're concentrating on the first part too much. And that second part is what I think is going to keep pushing you up and allow you to keep growing and keep building.
One of the things you got me thinking when you were talking there, and one of the things that I do with these interviews like this, because I don't have big numbers, not even huge numbers. I have a relatively small listenership, but I always think to myself that you, Sam, my goal with this interview is for you to walk away not thinking, oh, I wonder how many people are going to listen to this, but to think that was a solid hour, period. Like if that's as only far as it goes, that's my goal as a host and interviewer.
I think that's a good way because we both know, like, I know when I'm doing a bad interview, right? And like, even if I think the person is a good person, like I'll come off the interview being like, yeah, that's a good dude, but it was a terrible interview. It was a waste of my time. And I'm sure you think the same way. Like I've never thought to myself, nobody will see that was a waste of time. I've thought, that was a bad interview. That was a waste of time. Or that was a good interview. That was a really good use of time. And I feel the same way. Like, I'm at this place now where I'm trying to get like people to come to my studio that's in my house. And it's like, and there is this thing that you have to get over where you're like, Double J Jeff Jarrett is in my driveway. I can't be ashamed of the fact, like, I can't be there sitting there going like, oh, you shouldn't be there. You shouldn't be in my house because like, why not? Like if he's willing to do it.
I would have a bigger house, but like just the way it is now.
No, we're in between stuff right now, and it's just, but yeah. For me, like, there's very little that can shake me if they leave here. If somebody leaves here and I can tell that they enjoyed themselves, or if I can read that we have a different connection than we did before, right? Because when an interview is good. Not that you're gonna be best friends forever, but like you now have a connection with the person. And so when I can read that that's been established and that they had a good time,
that's it.
It doesn't matter. Like I don't even at that point, it's like the views are gonna be the views. I mean, from being an athlete, like you don't have control over all elements. Like all you can obsess about is the stuff that you have control over. And the other stuff, you'll drive yourself crazy if you don't let it go.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I do want to touch on before we're done. One is what you mentioned there, your studio, but I'll put that on kind of hiatus for now. Real quickly, can you just brief the audience and refresh my memory as well? Your kind of entrance into broadcasting. You went to Syracuse or Rochester?
I went to Syracuse.
Okay.
I went to Syracuse. So I was like I had the greatest time in radio ever. Like when I was in high school. Junior and senior year, I think it was, when it was like Howard Stern in the morning and Opie and Anthony in the afternoons. And it was like every morning I would drive to school listening to Howard, and every afternoon I'd like get in my car, I put on Opie and Anthony on WNEW, and then I'd drive home. And when I got home, I'd put it on like my stereo radio and just listen to the whole show. And it was great, right? So I've always loved that as well as wrestling and movies. So I went to Syracuse, and I did a ton of college radio and stuff there. And I ended up right before my senior year getting my internship with O&A, with Opie and Anthony. And I tried to get I applied to it. Opie and Anthony was where I wanted to get an internship. That was my favorite show at the time. But I tried a ton of places. Like I sent out resumes all over, CDs, like all over the place. And ironically, they were the only ones that got back to me, and they were the ones that I needed to get back to me. So they did, and I got the internship, and it went well. And then I went back to school for a year, but the whole time I was there, I was driving back to the city. Like it's like a 4-hour drive. So anytime, literally anytime that I had more than one day off school. So if I had more than a 3-day weekend in New York and I was calling up Travis or whoever and going like, "Hey, can I come in? Hey, can I come in? Hey, can I come in?" And I'd go in and just volunteer and work, and like Sam would just be there. So like, you know, every 6 weeks I was still there. Like I was fine. Like spring break, I was in New York in the studio. Christmas break, I was like kind of bummed because they took 2 weeks off for Christmas, and I was like, but I've only got Christmas break. I got to get in there, and but every break, like the whole time, like there was a week between my last fall and my graduation ceremony, and that week I went back to New York, worked on the show, and came back. My parents wanted to go to my graduation, so I came back. All right, I graduated, back to working for free and grinding it out. Months after I graduated, I got hired as an associate producer and kind of worked up from there. And as I was working up from there behind the scenes, I started developing kind of offshoot shows that they would put on Opie and Anthony's Sirius XM channel. And then I started dabbling more with the YouTube and the internet stuff and the podcast stuff, and everything kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, I want to backtrack a minute or two there, and it's really important for me to point this out. Like I said, because I talk a lot to kids, and kids want to know, like how do you become a UFC fighter? Well, there's a lot that goes into it, but the most important part for me and for you, which is why I feel a connection to your story and why I love your story, is what you just said. The back and forth, the 4 hours. That if I had a break, I went. Like, I'm from Pennsylvania. I moved to East Stroudsburg, PA. I would drive in and out of up and down Jersey. Like, honestly, sometimes it was if traffic was bad, 5 hours in a car to train for an hour to drive 3 hours, hopefully back home. So it was just insane. But I'm emphasizing the point that that's how it's done.
And it's great that you bring that up too, because it goes back to your original point where, like, I'm sure you didn't have people patting you on the back every single time you got out of the car going like, "Hey man, way to put in the effort." And if you had sucked in training, then I don't care about your 5-hour trip. You still suck. Like, you're still not going to make it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you still have to do the work. Like, you're not going to get extra credit because you drove.
Correct.
But what you are going to get is you're going to get closer to you. First of all, you're going to get to do the thing you want to do. Like the hour of training, you wanted to do that. Like that's what the drive was about, is because you wanted to be there, and I wanted to be a part of this thing. So I did the drive. Like, I didn't announce to all my friends, "Hey, look at me, Mr. Hard Worker. I'm driving again." It was like, nope. Sam just happens to be gone again this weekend. I guess he's going back to work on that show. And there was no like, were they paying you? Like, I wouldn't even entertain the conversation. I'm like, I'm not there. Like, that's not what this is about. None of it is about any of this. And I don't even want to talk to you about this because you're not with me here. And that's fine. That's fine. But like, I wanted to be there. And so I tried to find every conceivable way that I could get myself there. And that was the beginning, middle, and end.
Staying present, staying in your face. Hey, I'm still here. Hey, I'm still here. Hey, I'm working.
Hey, I'm still here. And ultimately, like, it's that. It's the, hey, I'm still here. Like, out of sight, out of mind. I want to make sure that you still remember me. But also, I mean, at that point, I'm like 21. If I can have one more day working on this show, I want to have the one more day. Right. So that was also how I looked at it. Like, I'm getting to work on that show for another day, and who knows what's going to happen today. And it was great, man.
And there's two things I want to draw out there. One, the correlation, to what we're talking about, wrestling or not wrestling, fighting and broadcasting with you in your career. The extra sucky part about the fighting part was I would go to like Frankie Edgar, who was a UFC champ. Like, I was training with these guys when I sucked very badly. So I would drive to actually get beat up to then drive home. So it was just like extra.
Right. Yeah. And that's the other thing. It's like you're going in, right? And like the best case scenario is you're going to show up on a day where it's Opie, Anthony, and Jim right there, like already, like the quickest, funniest guys ever. And they're going to be like, "Oh, here today it's Bill Burr, Patrice O'Neal, and Louis C.K. And hey, Sam, why don't you come in and add some input?" And you're just looking like, you're like, what? Like, you're trying to figure out like what's witty, and you got like the champions of that space in your face going like, okay, like, why are you here? Impress me. And it's tough.
And it's so obvious. And this is where it's worse in your arena. It's so obvious when you speak up when you shouldn't have. Like when you tried to be funny and you shouldn't have been funny.
And the whole room just stops because it's not, and this is what you come to realize. It's not just about pointing out that was not funny. It's about this like resentment where it's like we were all having fun and we were all on a roll and you ruined it.
And
Why did you ruin it?
Patrice was the king of that. So it's like extra sucky for you.
Yeah, Patrice would yeah, he would suffer no fools. He would, the minute like there was no sort of like, oh, I'm gonna let that one go with Patrice. It was why?
Yeah. So real quick, I remember fighting, and I remember there were certain people that I met for the first time, especially early on, but maybe throughout my career, but especially early on. I remember the first time I met Matt Hughes, I was starstruck, like absolutely starstruck. Like I was shaking. I remember seeing Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz in person the first time and just being like they were just very big dudes. Like I didn't realize how big they were. And I remember feeling like, and then I remember sitting behind Anderson Silva in a van on the way to the arena. And it was like, those stick out to me as like I'm in this game, but holy smokes, I'm a fan right now. And I'm really blown away at this. So whether it's with O&A, broadcasting, Jim and Sam, and or wrestling, what are a few of those people or moments that jump out at you as like, I may be in the big leagues, but boy, I am a fanboy right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's also moments where somebody might be looking at you as like, oh yeah, they're a professional like me, and you're just in your head going like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. This is insane. I remember like one year I went it was the first time I got to go to the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony. So the WWE does the Hall of Fame ceremony in an arena, and they pack the arena full of fans. But and they do it like concert style, right? So like where the stage would be is where the people go up and they accept their Hall of Fame thing and they do their speech or whatever. And where the general admission, like where the pit would be, is all floor seating, and that's all the superstars. Like that's the WWE roster. So like all the wrestlers come and they sit there on the floor, and that section is just for them. There's no fans. So this was the first time that I'd gotten to go. I think I went as a friend of X-Pac. I think this was the year I went as a friend of X-Pac. So he's the one. I wasn't like working there or anything like that. So I was there, and Stone Cold, and I was backstage too, and Stone Cold Steve Austin was there. And I was like, already it's like, oh my God, right? And so Stone Cold is talking about his podcast. He's like, yeah, I'm just starting a podcast thing, and you do the podcast. And he kind of had an somewhat of an awareness of who I was, and already I was like, that's off. Like that shouldn't be the case. But I was like, well, are you videoing your podcast? And he's like, oh, I'm thinking about it. What do you think? And I just started diarrhea of the mouth, like, yeah, you can take the content and you can use it for multiple purposes, and you blah, 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 blah. And I'm just talking. And he's just looking at me like Stone Cold. And I'm looking at him and like looking at his face. And I'm like, that's Stone Cold's face as I'm talking. And like in the middle of talking, he goes, you know what, Sam? I was like, what? And he was like, he just took out his cell phone. He's like, put your goddamn number in my phone and text yourself so we can keep in touch. I was like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. I'm trying to remember my phone number, like I'm trying to be, yeah. So like moments like that. Oh, and then like, it must have been, I think it was probably a couple years after that. I wake up one morning early for the radio, and it was like pretty quick after I'd started my podcast. So like the wrestling podcast. And when you start, if you can start a podcast and it's got a nice little wave of listeners, you could get to the top of the charts, especially back then on iTunes, because there weren't that many wrestling podcasts. Like you didn't need 1 million listeners to get on the charts back then. So like I had gotten on the charts because the wrestling podcast was pretty new, because they were counting every listener as a new listener. So I wake up and it's a text from Stone Cold. I was like, what? And he was like, hey, I saw your podcast is doing pretty well. If you ever want to come on mine, just say the word. And I'm like, the word, the word. And I ended up like getting on the phone with him later. And it's like just talking like a regular guy. What are you doing, Sam? Oh, I'm just having dinner. What are you eating? I'm like I flew to LA and did his podcast. And then I flew, and this goes back to our original conversation. He goes like, yeah, you should do the podcast sometime this week. If you're going to be I go, I might be in LA maybe like this week, whatever it was, this week of May. I had no plans to be in LA at any point. I was just like, and he was like, yeah, if you're in town, give me a holler. That was it. And I was like, oh boy, if you're in town, give me a holler. I'm like, do I fly to Los Angeles with no plan whatsoever because maybe Stone Cold will have me on his podcast? And I think you can guess what I did.
Yeah, try to explain that to your wife as well. Yeah, wait. You don't have like anything planned? No. What are you doing?
No.
Yeah, it might.
And I flew to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I flew to Los Angeles, and I did make, and it's so funny too. I made it on his podcast. Everything worked out perfectly. Like I was staying at a friend's house, and when we made plans, Stone Cold texted me his address, and my friend was like, he lives down like in walking distance. Like he lives down the block. And I was like, what? But it was yeah, it was incredible. Those are my Stone Cold moments.
Yeah. As you're talking, so this connects to the wrestling as well, but it's a cool experience like that also. I've gotten to be friends with Mark Marrow, and I would say friends with Diamond Dallas Page. And I have them both on my cell phone, and I've talked to them both on the phone, and it's the weirdest, most bizarre thing in the world.
It's so weird. I've gotten phone calls from DDP too, and it's still like, I'm like, this is Diamond Dallas Page, and like my phone will just be going off randomly, and I'm like, oh, who's calling me now? And it just says Diamond. It's obviously in my phone. It's Diamond Dallas Page. And I'm like, what? And I picked it up. Sammy, what's going on, brother? I'm like, hey, DDP. Like, what can I do for you? Because literally anything you need. Anything.
It's such a mind bend.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your studio and or kind of the branding and the developmentalness, the development of you as in your business. I'm super curious about that. From the origins, I don't remember from O&A, but the origins of Notsam, the name, your podcast studio, how you have that set up, whatever you feel comfortable, whatever you want to talk about, we'll go in that direction. But that's what I'm, as someone whose aspirations are to continue to grow in broadcasting, some of the stuff I'm really curious about.
Well, Notsam came before O&A. Like Notsam was my first thing. When I was in college, I wanted to develop a website just to make content. I mean, I think it was like on Angel Fire or something like that. It was, 2004, maybe 2003, something like that. And I was like, I want to do a website where I can just do content. Maybe I'll write movie reviews. Maybe I'll make fun of a celebrity or something like that, whatever it is. And and I was just going through and I was like, what would the website be called? Like I wanted it to be sam.com, but sam.com was obviously taken because it's not 1992. And I was like, oh, and literally I was like, Notsam isn't taken. And then I just started saying like, not Sam. Like it just sounded, the word sounded good. Like it was just the fact that it was weird and didn't really make sense appealed to me. The fact that like people would like go, I don't get it. And I'm like, yeah, I know. like that whole
and that's
thing.
the point of it.
Yeah, that's the whole deal. It's like I guess it's just one big troll. I don't know.
No, that's
but
go ahead.
But yeah, I was like, okay, so I called the website notsam.com, and then ever since then, like when social media pops up, I try to get the Notsam tag, and yeah, I don't know. It's just I think because I created it when I was so young and like completely, with nothing, like completely independent of everything. Like I almost like look at it as one of my children. I've got my two kids, and then I've also got Notsam, this little thing that nobody really gets. But like, I feel so connected to it,
and that's why it works. I'm trying to think of an analogy or a similar one. I can't, but it works because it doesn't work. And the sense, it's like there's order and chaos. That saying, like there's order and chaos within chaos. What it's that it doesn't work, and that's why it works.
And people would, like to this day will go like, Sam, not Sam, and they're like, oh yeah. Like that's what Paul Heyman still every time. Sam, not Sam.
So the studio aspect
Yeah.
of where you're at, and then the evolution of that. So what you're looking at right now, and I appreciate your compliment on that, but it started, I don't know, 5 years ago when I started my podcast in my house, that my old house, which was built in 1922, had asbestos, covered pipes and just a dingy POS. I've upgraded along the way. So kind of talk about your studio now and then the evolution of it.
Well, like, so when I first started doing the podcast, I mean, there were times, man, where like I could get a phoner with a wrestler for the wrestling podcast. And I live 30 minutes outside the city when there's no traffic, but when there is traffic, it's a haul, that doubles and triples sometimes. Um, and like there'd be days where like I'd be able to get a phoner with a WWE wrestler for the podcast, but they're like, he can only do it at 4 o'clock. Is that okay? And I'd be like, yeah, of course. I'm not going to ever turn that down, but that would mean, am I going to sit in the city from the time the show's over all day long until 4? Am I going to drive home and then have to drive back in? And like, I would do it, but it'd be tough. But for the most part, I would record most of my wrestling podcast on like a Yeti mic that was plugged in with an adapter into an iPad and onto this app on the iPad. And that would kind of be, I would put it on my dining room table. We were in a 1-bedroom apartment. So that would be the entire podcast studio. And for the first, I don't know, long time of the podcast, it would be like that. It would either be there or just wherever I could find a spot, I'd bring my Zoom recorder and that would be where we were recording the podcast. I didn't like, I wasn't recording it in the Sirius studios or whatever. And, then when it came time to, we had our first kid, we're moving into a house. I talked to my wife and I was like, look, I don't care where we move, within reason, but I don't care. I don't care where the house is. I don't care what the house looks like. I don't care the size of the house. I don't care anything about this house that we live in. I trust you. You have full control. You have autonomy from the ground level to the sky. Everything is yours. But the house has to have a basement that is either finished or that I can finish. And I have to be able, it has to be big enough that I can put a studio in it. I need full autonomy of the basement. You can have everything else. And she was like, okay, that's a deal. And because this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a studio in the basement. And so, as soon as we moved in, actually a couple of days before we moved in, my friend Kevin Undergaro, who runs, he ran AfterBuzz for a while. He's married to Maria Menounos and does all of her business. She's doing a ton in the sort of podcast, YouTube streaming space now. So, but he builds all her studios, like all the stuff that they do. He builds studios in their house, and he built all the AfterBuzz studios and everything. So he saw the same vision that I saw, and he came over, and over the course of 23 hours straight, we just sat here in this basement kind of building everything, putting the lights up and the monitors and figuring everything out. And then he left after that marathon, and I kind of put all the tech in, all the mics, figured out where I wanted the cameras to go. They were different cameras at the time. And built this out. Like we literally he and I built this table, painted it, put the monitor on it, the whole thing. Yeah, and so and the goal was just to have a place where I can broadcast. I felt like if I was a fighter, right, and I had the ability, I would want to put a cage in my house, right? Like if you had the space, it would be great to have a cage in your house so that you wouldn't have to go anywhere. If I was a basketball player, I would love to be at the place where I could put a court in my house. I'm a broadcaster. I should have a studio in my house. And so that's what I did. Yeah. And I wired it up for the internet so that, and it's all designed so that I don't need to have anybody over. So, because I never understood people building studios in their houses, but building them in a way where they need a producer over.
Yeah.
Because then you got to call your producer. You got to make it like, you might as well just book a studio or something like that. Like this is all designed so that I can run everything from right here. And that if I want to do a Zoom call with you, it'll work. If I want to broadcast a show to YouTube, it'll work. If I want to record an audio podcast, whatever I need to do, it'll work, to the point where like all the cameras and everything have been upgraded. because last year, during the middle of the pandemic, the WWE Network kind of noticed that I was able to create my own content and signed me to do a 15 episode series on the WWE Network.
Huge.
So I was like, sure. You just say yes.
Yes.
And then I call my buddy Hot Dog and I'm like, Hot Dog, we got to figure out how to do a TV show. Because we have one now. And so, we upgraded all the cameras. We did a bunch of stuff. I brought a switcher in and everything. And now it's a television studio for all intents and purposes.
And do you do all of your editing? Can you hear me? Can't hear me. We're having a little bit of an audio glitch here.
So I don't do all my post editing. Yeah. I saw there was a glitch there for a second. I heard you ask me if I did all my editing though.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I do I have a switcher here that so I can do a ton of stuff live.
Oh.
I try to do some of my editing live. But the stuff that I don't do live, I do try to outsource. I got Hot Dog, who's been with me for years now, who's like excellent. So he helps me out with a ton of stuff. And then I got this kid, Reed, too, who helps with a bunch of stuff. But those guys are really good at me sending them stuff and hitting me back pretty quick with the edits.
So I had a guy years ago, I was looking to do something I ended up not doing, but he said something that has stuck with me. He says, knowing is easy, right? So once you know things, you're like, oh, that's easy. Well, yes, but you didn't know it. So therefore you couldn't have done it. What you just did there with the switching of screens, I didn't know that existed. That's like magic to me. So you doing that, like you have, you having been in studio and learning the ropes over the years is such an added bonus to then doing this stuff at home in your studio. Smokes, we're having an audio.
Yeah. I saw it. Yeah, it's kind of slowing down and catching up. So I'm catching what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, when I was building the studio out, and I still do to this day, like I spent hours on YouTube watching like videos about mics and videos about switchers and videos about boards and watching other podcasts, not necessarily for content, but for like how they are doing their show. Because most of these video podcasts, it's not the most, it's not like it's a TV studio doing it. It's like somebody's just set it up that way. So if they set it up that way, I can set it up that way. So then I start figuring out switchers. And once I find like a good gear YouTube channel, I go and start subscribing and looking at all their videos that they do and everything. So, yeah, I think it's knowing is the difficult part, but there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of figuring stuff out. And, I've been kind of into computers and video editing since I was in high school. So it's not like it's a foreign world to me.
Yeah. And another reason that I appreciate you being here and talking with you and learning from you right now is because it's like there's a model to follow. And what you just said about, having the studio in your house, I'm sitting here in my studio. In front of me, I have a wrestling mat. And then to my left, I have a weight room. So it was exactly my thoughts to my wife. I don't care. Give me like a place where I can train and a place where I can record that looks professional, and I could care less about anything else. So it's like, if anyone's listening and you're trying to think like, how do I accomplish XYZ goal? What Sam is saying, you can apply to anything, and it's a gradual progression forward.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just about like dealing with what you've got, like figuring out like, you're not going to have a house probably where you could put a basketball court in there. That's a very big thing. But what can you do with the space that you have? Like you just said, like, are you going to build out an entire studio with all these lights and blah, blah, blah? No, but are you going to when is that ever going to be on video anyway? Like, why would you ever need a space that big? And can you just build out a corner of your house and turn it into a studio? And, most people have a corner that they can at least set up as a temporary studio that they can build up and tear down and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that just applies to studios. I think that applies to kind of everything.
Yeah. And then to kind of start to wind down or round down our time here. So I have a wife and two kids, they're 7 and 4. And I've been with my wife for 9 years, and we've been dating for a lot longer than that. So she knew me as a wrestler, and then I graduated college and became a teacher. And I think her her thought was, I'm marrying a teacher. And then 3 years after teaching, I said, I'm going to leave teaching and start fighting, which I would never did in my life. And we had some very rocky years because of the uncertainty, because of my total focus on making this thing happen. And it is not fun at all. The memories are not fun memories. We joke about them now, but they were terrible. And even now, building my speaking career, and I've written a couple books, and it's so freaking hard to get listenership. It's so hard to book gigs and to figure out the rhythm of doing that. Can you just talk a little bit about the realities of that? And I don't know how difficult or not difficult it was, but again, people want to do things in life, and then they come up with reasons to not do it, and or they have a false impression of it being smooth sailing. So can you talk about that, family and building something that is special that might be taking a while to catch on, and then any kind of benchmarks along the way that make you say, hey, we're doing this. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky. I met my wife, like we started dating when I was an intern. So, and I don't know that I've changed all that much as a person from who I was then to who I am now. Like I've always been somebody that's, trying to get the most juice out of the berry as humanly possible. And I've always been obsessive. And, even when I wasn't doing wrestling podcasts, I was still obsessed with wrestling. All this stuff that I'm professionally obsessed with now, I was personally obsessed with before. So, I think she always saw that. Like I said, like she was with me when I was traveling back and forth from Syracuse to New York. So she saw that part of me. Like she's known that this is who I am from the beginning. And we also have the benefit of her watching the slow progression, right? She sees it as slowly as I do. She's not, dipping out for a year and then coming back and being like, "Oh yeah, you're doing so much, you're doing so great." And it's like, no, she's been there every single day and watching, brick by brick by brick, just, scratching away, scratching away, scratching away. So she's fully aware of that. So it's not like it's a foreign concept to her. The on a macro level, on a micro level, there are definitely frustrating times. I mean, there have been plenty of times where it's like, I remember when I was younger and I'm like editing a video and she's like, we're eating dinner now and like you're still editing the video. I'm like, yeah, but this has to get done. And I haven't she sees that that there is a benefit to it getting done. And she sees that like you never know what's gonna work and what's not gonna work. You have to try everything. So she sees all that. But I also have to go out of my way to make sure that I'm not taking advantage of that understanding and that, like I'm with this person because I enjoy her. So like I have to make that clear to her too. Like there has
Yeah.
to be opportunity that I take to do that, And now that we have two kids, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So it's like number one, I'm obsessed with them too now. Like that's just an added obsession, as I'm sure you can relate to. And you know, you don't want to sacrifice any of your work, but you also don't want to sacrifice your relationship with your kids. And I think that that's just something where like the thing that you sacrifice is you have to be okay just being exhausted. Like you have to go back to that same thing that we were talking about where it's like, you're going to have to just bust your ass and do 3 full-time jobs. But you get everything that you want out of it.
Yeah.
You get to have your work, you get to have your relationship with your wife, you get to have your kids. Triple H actually said something really like wise, I would say, where he's talking about like work-life balance. Because, you look at Triple H and he's a guy too that's obsessed with his professional life, but he's gone from being a professional wrestler to being one of the most important people in the WWE organization and being the head of a brand himself and being such a visible part of that global entertainment company. And he's got kids and he's got a wife and he's got all this stuff and he trains like insane. He's still huge. He's still training every day. And like at some points he's jumping back in a ring and doing this again. And it's like, it's mind blowing when you really think about it, if you know how much that guy does. But he was talking about work-life balance and how like it's a myth. There is no work-life balance. You don't do 50% of this and 50% of that. It's just like you need to be where you're needed. And when you're needed, you need to be there. Whatever you're doing, you do it at 100%. Like when you're with your kids, you're with your kids. When you're with your wife, you're with your wife. When you're working, you're working. And you just, if you are where you're needed and you know where you're needed, I think a lot of times people will almost use their professional life as an excuse. You know what I mean? Because either they want the adulation of, oh, you're such a hard worker, I can't believe how much you're doing. Or, they want to escape their family for a while or whatever. And if that's the case, that's fine. But then don't act like, oh, this work-life balance is so tough, because that's not what it is. You know when you're needed, where you're needed, and you know the difference between being needed and being wanted, and you can be where you're needed.
Is it hard for you to draw those lines and to turn off one from the other?
No, if anything, it's gotten easier, man. I mean, like, I'm literally, especially working from home, like, I've developed the ability to, I'm doing the show with Jim on Sirius, and like during a commercial break, I'll go upstairs, say hi to the kids, mess around with them, come back downstairs, right back at it. And it's like, it's two separate worlds, but they can coexist, without issue. I don't need to I don't have this like process of, okay, I'm not Sam on the radio anymore. Now I'm Sam at home. Like that's the other thing too. Like it helps that you meet me in person. I mean, I might be slightly nicer in person than I am on the air. Maybe not, but I'm not that different when I'm doing my wrestling podcast or when I'm doing my radio show or when I'm having dinner. It's just, I'm being myself.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I was going to mention I love that article you reposted. So Forbes.com said that Sirius should sign you guys to a long-term deal. I really appreciate that, because I asked about kind of fulfillment or these benchmarks along the way. That has to feel good. That had to feel good.
That article was insane. Yeah. Just here's what was crazy about that article too. Number one, the fact that like it's in Forbes and the headline is, it's not like, oh, Jim and Sam's contract is up. It's Sirius needs to re-sign these guys. And it's an article and it's in Forbes and you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then you start looking through the article and like, I was just saying, when you're an intern or when you're like young in the game and you go into the room and it's O&A and it's Bill Burr and Louis C.K. and all these guys and Patrice O'Neal and you're like, oh my, and Jim Norton. And you're like, oh my God. I'm sitting there reading this article and it's like, Jim's now my co-host and Ricky Gervais, who's like a genius, is in the article saying nice things about me. And I'm like, I think I need some time to process. This is too insane right now.
It's really cool to see, man. And is there, and I don't know what you can or want to say out loud, but do you guys have plans of back in the studio? Has any of that been talked about, figured out for the next couple months?
Yeah. I mean, I think we'll be back in pretty soon. It seems like, I feel like people weren't aware of how quick it would go.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the move that everybody in general is making to get back to life, which is great, is moving quicker than people realized. And I think Sirius is on board with that. I think originally they had told us maybe like September-ish, maybe after the summer. So I would think at least by September we'll be back. But I honestly wouldn't be shocked if they were like, the studios are open if you'd like to come back. And okay, we'll come back. I think far sooner than later we'll be back in studio.
Yeah. This has been awesome. We're at just over an hour right now. Like I said, incredible respect from me to you in terms of the persistence, the stick-to-itiveness, the progression forward, it exemplifies, and I'm not blowing smoke right here, I'm being honest, like it exemplifies how it should be done. I'm giving a presentation to a school, talking to kids. You're a guy that I'm saying this is how it's done. how it's done. So absolutely appreciate you being here. Share, where Jim and Sam Show on Sirius XM, Notsam Wrestling Podcast, anything else that you'd like to put out there for fans of O&A, Jim and Sam, and or wrestling.
Well, yeah, or fans of O&A. I was
right?
on that show too. Yeah, why not? Well, first of all, I really appreciate you having me on and saying all those nice things. That's very, very nice. Yeah. So Jim and Sam is on Sirius XM channel 103 in the mornings, and we're on the Sirius XM app if you have that. Not Sam Wrestling is the podcast, comes out every Monday. Also, 2 YouTube channels, the Not Sam Wrestling YouTube channel, where all the strictly wrestling stuff goes. And then Not Sam is my other YouTube channel where I do Sam Roberts Now and other various videos and shows and stuff from right here in the Not Sam studio. So yeah, check it all out. Not Sam on social. If you just search Not Sam, you'll find
Yeah, you're the only Not Sam out there.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. I appreciate you being here, Sam.
Thank you very much, man.